So it's actually a systemic problem that we're going to talk about. But first, I do want to introduce our two expert panels. The first person I'd like to introduce is Michael Hurst. He is the managing attorney for Indiana Legal Services. If you could come on up, Michael. Thank you. He is also over the eviction avoidance program, in which we often, in the ERCC, send people to him. Also, I want to introduce, just because her last name, second, I'm going to introduce her second because her last name starts with M, and M comes after H. Dr. Brianka Merritt. She is actually clinical assistant professor and founding director for the Center for Research on Social Inclusion and Social Policy. So let's welcome Dr. Merritt. So at this time, if you guys, we're going to go ahead and start talking about the documentary. So hopefully you guys will have some wow moments as well as some awesome questions for Dr. Merritt and Michael Hurst. I'm going to let you guys share.
I could talk really loud. Can people hear me if I talk like this? Okay,
Yeah.
you can have the mic.
So if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand, or a wow moment, a wow comment, and I'll come around and I'll give you the mic. Any questions first? No one wants to be first. Okay. So you can ask a question about whatever you like in accordance with evictions. Although the documentary focused on Kansas City, it is the same problem here in Indianapolis. And so I just chose a city that was Midwestern. So you can ask any kind of question you like or make a comment about evictions.
My name's Alicia. The first question that I would like to ask is, eviction is something that is plaguing our city. I'm testimony to that, and I have a lot of people that I know also face the same situations. So one of the questions that I would like more clarification on is, why is there not some type of backup plan for evictions for the city? Is there that creation, is that available? Is it something that's close to our developers here in the city, or our legislation?
Don't jump at the question.
Michael's just dumping stuff off on me. That's okay. So I think there are a couple of ways to answer your question, because I think there are programs to help avoid eviction. There's also legislation and policy that can help mitigate that as well. And then there's also kind of intermediary things you can do. So one of those intermediary options are things like financial assistance. Nationally, that's been shown to help reduce evictions, because you can help people pay their rent, you don't get evicted. So there are ways across the city, places like ERCC, where you can get some financial support and guidance. We've done some work that shows that that's really not sufficient or easily accessible. Not necessarily ERCC, but even things like township assistance is very difficult for people to actually have all the things that allow people to qualify for that type of funding. So, but we know that that always helps. Another thing, like I said, programmatically, are things like Michael's work with the eviction avoidance program, where you can help people, particularly who need legal representation. Like they showed on the screen, a lot of tenants don't have representation once they are evicted. And they talked about in New York, which is a really common example where, if you have that type of support, people are more likely to win their cases. And so we don't have that here. There are some other cities that are experimenting with having more writ large options, but groups like Michael's are ones that are trying to do that, but they serve a smaller proportion of the overall need that's there, and so that's definitely an opportunity. And then just legislatively, just like Missouri, Indiana is a very landlord-friendly state, so it is very difficult to get policies enacted that help protect tenants. So we can talk about that probably in more detail later. But we are a very landlord-friendly state, so that means that people and landlords might come from other places around the country to rent and develop rental properties because they know that Indiana is very lenient. They can get away with some things they wouldn't in other states. And so that does kind of create a market for more housing that is less tenant friendly, but also just absolutely. And so it creates more options for landlords to do that. So to your point, I think there are definitely some gaps in Indiana that we are not addressing. I'm saying that very lightly in opportunities for improvement. So.
Yeah, the thing that I would add, and you touched on this in a couple different ways, is the biggest issue. One of the speakers in the film used the term perfect storm for evictions, and I've actually been thinking about that because when somebody says, why do we have so many in Indiana or in Indianapolis, for example, I don't think there's a magic bullet. I don't think there's one reason. I think there are lots of reasons, but the one that I keep coming back to is what they talked about on the film. There is an insufficient number of affordable units in Indianapolis. Let's just talk about Indianapolis. In Indianapolis. And so I want to give you some hope. There are organizations that are working on developing more affordable units in Indianapolis. There's an organization, a national organization called the Corporation for Supportive Housing. And they work directly with service providers, community service providers, educators, and other organizations, and housing developers to provide them with financial incentives to develop affordable housing. And more importantly, from my perspective, because a lot of people in poverty, a lot of people who are underserved have vulnerabilities, other vulnerabilities, mental health issues, criminal backgrounds, things like that. More importantly, those affordable housing units would come with supportive services. So they'll bring in the developer, and they'll bring in city officials, and they'll bring in service providers. They'll provide incentives for developing that affordable housing, and they'll put together programs where there's a mental health provider in the housing complex as well. Those initiatives are happening. One of the really frustrating things is that good people doing good things can never quite get them done as fast as they need to be done. So I'm telling you that that's happening, that's out there. Another thing that that is out there is with safety net has huge holes, and we all know that. But related to housing, with the exposure that Indianapolis has received as a result of this 2016, so this stat we're working with is almost 4 years old. The exposure that we are getting has caused policymakers and city officials and state legislators to start paying attention. And there are lots of folks like Doctor here who's advocating and bringing in the statistics and the data to get people to pay attention because data drives policy. So the city of Indianapolis right now is revamping its certification process. My wow moment watching this film was the idea that if every landlord would be required to have a home inspection, that would address a lot of the habitability issues that we have. And so the city's looking at an ordinance that they could put into place that provides some additional tenant rights, as well as looking at ways to require the landlords to go through a process that makes sure that ensures that the housing that they're renting is safe and habitable when they rent it. Later on I'll talk, I'm sure, about how that's not really where the main problem is. The habitability issues isn't really the main issue, but the city's doing that. And then last session, two different legislators introduced legislation that would try to level the playing field a little bit between landlords and tenants. One bill required that all landlords provide advanced notification to a tenant, and that also gives them time to correct the deficiency, whatever it is, well before an eviction action is filed. And you would be surprised to learn, perhaps, that if you've got a lease for a period of time, the landlord is not required to give you any sort of notice that you're behind or give you any sort of time to catch up. If you're behind, you're behind, and if they want to, they can go straight to court. So looking at a notice provision that at least gives tenants an opportunity to get it together before a case is filed, because once a case is filed, let me use the legal term, you're screwed. Once a case is filed, you're behind the 8 ball now. So that's one piece. Now it failed. That legislation failed, but one of my colleagues who works with Prosperity Indiana says we had a hearing in the basement of the State House on that one, but next time, this session, we're going to introduce it again, and we might move up a little bit and start to get better attention. There was another piece of legislation that had lots of different tenant rights in it that also failed. They're going to reintroduce that again too. So, I'm sorry, people are paying attention, people are doing things, but if you measure success based on what got done, yeah, we're failing. If you measure it based on what we're trying to do and the conversations that are happening, then those things are out there. I want you to have hope, though, that people are trying to put together a plan B that addresses the root cause of a problem. And it doesn't just put Band-Aids on it.
Okay, we're going to take another question.
Hello. Right. You said a major buzzword, which is redevelopment program, which in my head, I always have some caution and reservation about when that word redevelopment pops up, especially when we are talking about affordable housing. We know that oftentimes when people do redevelopment, they choose it in areas that are not as, lack of a better word, that don't have a high presence of white individuals within it. So it really exacerbates the issue that Indianapolis is the most segregated area in Indiana, second to Fort Wayne. And sometimes those redevelopments exacerbate the segregation. So do you know any type of plans within the redevelopment to prevent further segregation? Do you know any plans for mixed income affordable housing units? Because we know that statistically when there are affordable housing and you're allowed to have a mixed income, there is less crime, there's more access to social capital and capital in general, and there's more accessibility to treatments and just anything that they may need. So do you know any plans of that? Because redevelopment is the buzzword in Indianapolis right now.
So this is a much quicker answer. No? I couldn't speak with authority about that level of the development of affordable housing. I'm not tuned into that at all. I will tell you that BWI, which is a real estate developer that develops affordable and supportive housing units, does, like they redevelop Penn Place Apartments, which is kind of across from the library and down the street. And there are market rate units that people can bring vouchers into. And there's very low income folks there, and there are also folks there that live there who are able to pay the market rate for the units. Mercy Housing out of Chicago is another housing provider that does the same thing. So I take your point. My focus on the affordable housing being developed isn't, and I want to be careful how I say this, my focus isn't so much on where it's being developed or whether it's multi-use. I know a lot of developers in neighborhoods want a Starbucks on the ground floor and mixed income units on the top floors. My focus isn't that. My focus is, can you afford the housing that you're in wherever it's in? And oftentimes it's in segregated communities, and I appreciate that point very much.
I'll echo no. And also, but you bring a point they did talk about in the documentary, which is nationally, the people who are most likely to be evicted are Black women and households with children. I think Michael would say locally that a lot of his clients meet some of those same criteria too. I think we'd also be remiss to not talk about how renting is very much related to homeownership historically, redlining and systemic and surgical precision in which some of these neighborhoods were developed. And so again, thinking about predatory lending, if you know that neighborhoods are segregated, what is the benefit for a landlord or someone else to come in and develop these units or rent to people if they know who's going to live there? And if there are preconceived notions in discrimination among landlords, which we've seen statistically as well, that they do discriminate and they make assumptions based on what you look like and your ability to afford. There's also provisions legislatively around discrimination about source of income. So if you have a housing voucher, which is supposed to help offset some of those costs, a landlord can say, I still don't want to rent to you because I know where you're getting your income from. And that tends to be a lot of, obviously low income people, but that tends to be also related to race and ethnicity as well. And so I think you're talking about a larger issue where we know, again, that here's a group that's more likely to not just be evicted, but to be kind of systematically discriminated against historically and systemically, as well as when it comes to just being able to rent. So it's a bigger question than, I think, just the gentrification issue about like how you even get to the point of doing that. I would also add that they've done a lot of work around mixed use or mixed income housing. And the problem that you're kind of alluding to without saying it is that nationally some of that just doesn't work because the people with higher incomes ultimately leave. And then so how do you maintain that level of integration with income if the folks who are supposed to be kind of making it better don't want to stick around and see it through? So I think there's a larger issue you're getting at, so appreciate that.
We're going to take another question.
Hi, good morning. I really appreciate this event, and I really appreciate the food being here today because I was hungry. But not as a result of any sort of deficiency. I am also a testimony to eviction, and I'm currently 7 months into my perfect storm. So all these services here in Indiana, have told me that, I'm too put together to receive any of their assistance, right? So I'm supposed to walk up in there like acting like what, I can't read, or didn't do my laundry, or whatever it is. I mean, I just don't understand, right? And I'm just like, who's there to help? Anybody. These programs are not helping anyone. There's money all over the place for all type of stuff. You see all type of things happening, and they have the nerve, the audacity to tell people that there's no money. I worked at Northwestern University for 22 years, right? And I'm now here in Indiana working at a gas station, swinging a mop, because people are, what they say? I don't know. Like, I'm bringing too much to the table, and as a black woman, that's not acceptable. It's like, how dare you with your nappy hair? You don't even have a degree, but you have all the skill. You can't work here. What is that? I just don't understand it. And I would really like some help, because I'm tired of sleeping in a hotel with my son, who's on Ben Davis marching band, okay, who is over 6 feet tall. He weighs 300 pounds. He wears size 15 shoes, size 44 pants, okay? What am I supposed to do? When you told your story this morning, I can truly relate, because that's crazy. You're trying to better yourself. We all, trying to better ourselves, and still we find ourselves in this situation. Why?
I'm sorry you experienced that. I'm sorry that you're going through that. I'm tempted to tell you all kinds of positive stories about help that was provided, but that's not going to make your situation better, and it's not going to make you feel better. You bring up a really good point. And the really good point is the assistance that's out there, whether it's financial or alternative housing, affordable housing assistance, services that are out there. In Indianapolis, just like everywhere else, it tends to be siloed. And what I mean by that is, if you're somebody who's got a mental health issue, there are lots of opportunities for you with that mental health issue. But if you don't have the mental health issue and you're just working poor, those aren't available to you. If you're somebody who has kids, there's services that are available for you because you have kids. But if you're a single white male coming out of homelessness needing a place to go, those aren't available to you. And I could keep giving you examples like that because we're very siloed in the support and the services that we have. And so folks who don't fit a specific silo go here, and they go here, and they go here, and they go here, and they're further traumatized by the brick walls that they hit and the closed doors that they hit. Now, I can tell you story after story about people that I've helped and we've been able to get services for, but that's not going to help. That doesn't solve the issue that you raised. That's a policy issue. That's an issue that needs to be brought to policymakers, and that's a brick wall too if the policymakers don't care, or if the policymakers are focused on something else. This isn't a budget issue. 20,000 people were at the State House yesterday wearing red shirts talking about teacher pay, but this isn't a budget year, and so this year, no matter what else happens, the pay is not going to be there, but they're going to be focused on education. It's going to be a big education year anyway. They're not going to be paying attention to some of the issues that you raised this year.
I do want to say something really quick to our friend's point. I know someone who was on the list for Section 8, and they mentioned that in the film. She got on the list, I think, in 2004, was given the number 25,000 and something, and she finally got housing in 2015. So talk about, services that are out there that aren't helpful. We have enough. Dr. Merritt, did you want to comment?
I think just real quickly, I think Michael said a couple things. One, that evictions and housing there's not a silver bullet because it's not just about housing, right? It's everything. You're talking about lack of assistance and the siloing of it, but we know that nationally the thing that works is being able to have all these systems talk to each other. So having mental health talk with housing, talking with the school system, we just don't have that in Indianapolis, and we're not ready. I also think, to your point, related to being a black woman and kind of receiving these perceptions of how you should look, I think one of the other issues with both kind of legislators and service providers is that we expect eviction and housing instability to look a certain way. And so I think a lot of people will see a panhandler on the street and assume that's what homelessness looks like, or that's what housing instability looks like, when to your point, it goes the full spectrum of a person's employment or experiences or backgrounds. And so for people in the room who have not experienced that, just to make sure that you keep an open mind too about, like, I think you said this, the person next to you could be experiencing that and you don't know it. And so I think that's a very common experience for people who are trying to get services, and because you don't look or present a certain way, that they're not ready to meet you where you are because you're not meeting what they think the definition should look like. So know that your experience is not uncommon at all either, unfortunately.
We've got another question.
Well, it's not really a question, but it is a comment. I'm a financial coach here at Ivy Tech through the ERCC, and I just want to say thank you, Attorney Hurst. He's an excellent
advocate. Are you Michelle Robbins?
I'm Michelle. Then we need a hug, don't we? He is such an advocate for students. He's been actually in court with our students, and he's prevented some evictions for our students. And we don't have that type of talent and expertise voluntarily going into courtrooms and fighting for these students, whereas they wouldn't have an advocate with them, and they would have been evicted and had nowhere to go otherwise. But through his eviction avoidance program, we do educate our students about how they can get in touch with Indiana Legal Services to get that type of help prior to them even getting to that point. And I'm learning a lot. I didn't even realize that once the eviction process starts, once they have a case number, that goes on their credit. That goes on their credit report. And I don't know if people didn't realize that. So through the financial literacy program in the ERCC, we're really trying to teach students not to let it get to the point of where they're ready to start eviction process. You want to take care of that long before it gets to that point. So we really are trying to educate our students here and help them understand. We do have some support systems in place for them. Through the financial aid, we can possibly, be able to help them, but the biggest thing I've seen is if they can get ahead of the game, before, when they start seeing the red flags, we're teaching and we're helping them with budgets so that, or they can find more affordable housing so that they can stay. It would be such a good thing for Indianapolis to focus on more student housing. I'm seeing that as a problem. Even the IUPUI students are, having problems being able to afford the housing because students, they don't have that kind of income. And so hopefully that's a priority in Indiana, and we can get help. But please use the ERCC and use Attorney Hurst's services because he is doing an excellent service for the community.
Well, I wish you would personalize it to Attorney Hurst because it's Indiana Legal Services. They ponied up the money to hire an attorney to do this. Kind of what they were talking about in Kansas City. We wish we had a full-time attorney who could do this work. I want full disclosure, though. This is really important to know. So this eviction avoidance project that we started last year it has two components. One of the components is a right to counsel component. They talked about New York City providing counsel to a lot of their folks, and it reduced homelessness by 24%. Philadelphia just introduced and passed an ordinance 4 days ago to do the exact same thing. There are other communities that are doing that where they're putting attorneys in eviction court. And so there's a right to counsel. So that's one component. And then the other component of this project is using community service providers. I talked about people who are vulnerable, who have other kinds of vulnerabilities, not just the fact that they are in underserved communities or they're underserved. I've received 246 referrals in the first year of the program. We were able to represent and work with 200 of those folks, and we helped them avoid evictions. We helped 50 of them avoid the case even being filed. I just worked with one guy, 76-year-old vet, who's like 2 months behind in his rent, and his landlord didn't want to put him out. These aren't villains. I mean, forget about the bed bugs. Those are outliers. Right? The problem is in the middle. The problem is the single African-American mother with 2 or 3 children who works 3 jobs or who is married to a partner who is abusive, and as a result of some issue of life that happens to us all, lost income and was unable to make their rental payments. And that's not a villain. I didn't just describe a villain. I described somebody experiencing life. And the landlords themselves, again, if they're not renting out, bad properties, if they're not abusing their tenants in any way, shape, or form, they're not villains either. Just because they want rent, they're not villains either. And so the problem is there in the middle, not with the outliers. That's my perspective. Some of you guys might disagree. Working with this veteran, this 76-year-old veteran, fell behind in his rent. He's 2 months behind. The landlord's worked with him for months to try to help him. She doesn't want to put him out, but she has to. She's got a rental unit that she needs rent for. She's the property manager. She needs rent for it. She's worked with him for a long time. And he went to the VA. The VA referred him to me. The VA was a community partner who was working with that particular individual with that particular vulnerability. And I'm an attorney. I run my mouth. That's what I do. And so I called the landlord, I called the property manager, and I talked to her until she said, "Stop! Okay. I'll wait 2 more weeks before I file." That was huge. That guy might not have cared about a filing at 76 years old, but it's huge for them not to file. And then we were able to connect him with not the VA anymore, because he had tapped them out cold, but there was a National Guard financial resource that was available to him that nobody knew about, except one of our attorneys who works with veterans all the time. And so these partners kind of working together. That referral came in. We were able to get this landlord to hold off filing. We were able to connect this veteran to a financial service that he didn't even know existed. The VA didn't even know it existed. And what's today? Wednesday? Monday, he paid his rent in full with their assistance. And so he's good now for a while. I don't know if he's going to be good 2 months from now, but he's good now for a while. The important piece is there's an attorney involved, right? That's important. And the other important piece is that there's a community service provider that is tapping the attorney. to help. I said this last night at a big event over at the Hebrew Congregation Center. There's this guy at, I'm sorry, I'm using all your time. There's a guy, Michael Johnson, financial coach at Cafe, Community Alliance on the Far East Side. Michael learned about this program and won't leave me alone, right? He keeps sending folks to me, which is wonderful. The point that I made is, if I've got a community provider who's willing to pony up money and write a check for somebody to help them with their arrears, then we're going to find a way to provide that person with legal counsel to get them to a place where that check can be written and make a difference. And so that community piece is absolutely huge. So I started this out by saying, don't personalize it to me. I'm an attorney who runs my mouth and cares about the people that I work with. But Michelle, if ivytech didn't write a check for a client recently, the pay and stay I worked out for that client, I negotiated for that client, wouldn't have a chance in hell. You know, it just wouldn't. So in Cafe, ponying up a check for a domestic violence provider, being willing to open up a spot at Coburn Place for transitional housing in a domestic violence situation, and me being able to use that to buy enough time with the landlord to give her that soft landing, that's huge. It's the partnership. It's not any individual. And that's the communication piece that the silos need to do a better job with.
We've got another question.
So I know you work with evictions, but what about foreclosures
Yeah.
for homes?
I don't work with foreclosures, but there are 3 legal service organizations in the city of Indianapolis that provide foreclosure, defense, and assistance to underserved populations. And there's income eligibility guidelines for all 3 of them. One is Indiana Legal Services, my organization. I do rental evictions, but there are attorneys in my organization that handle foreclosure assistance. Another one is the Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic. Excellent organization, great attorneys there. And then Legal Aid Society of Indianapolis. All 3 of them, I don't have numbers in my head here for you, but all 3 of those organizations provide free legal services to eligible clients, income eligible clients, and all 3 of them do foreclosure assistance work. And if you go to the website for any one of those 3 organizations, Indiana Legal Services, Neighborhood Christian Legal Clinic, thank you, and Legal Aid Society of Indianapolis, you'll be able to get their intake information and give them information, tell them you've got a foreclosure issue, and they will assign an attorney to either provide you with guidance or actually represent you in the action.
I've got a pre-written question for Dr. Merritt. What is the difference between a formal and an informal eviction, and what are the implications of each?
I think they kind of alluded to it in the documentary, but like Michael said, what you don't want is an eviction to get to the point where it's on the case docket. That is a formal eviction. That is when we actually see a person going to court and actually going through the system to get evicted. It is on their record. It is in the system. We know they're evicted. Informal evictions are things that we don't see. So it can range for something like, pay up your rent, but you don't go to court, but you're on the streets. It could be something where you don't have a lease in place, and so the landlord has more flexibility to kick you out, and you don't have documentation to prove that you were actually even living there. And there are things where a landlord could make it more complicated for you to stay. So I think they gave the example, the documentary about bed bugs, and that they tried fixing it themselves. Or the lady who went to court for a similar issue, and she tried telling the landlord several times that, where I live is not clean or not safe, and the landlord didn't fix it. So the landlord can say, whatever, fix it on your own, fix it not on your own. I'm not responsible for that. And so what that leads to often is a self-eviction, is when someone says, well, I'm not going to stay here, and then they skip out on their rent. They're oftentimes technically well within their rights to do that based on habitability. But if you're not going through the legal process to prove that there's a habitability issue, it doesn't matter if your landlord is making your place very difficult to live, and they can say, well, you didn't pay your rent, and they can take you to court for not paying your rent, which is also within their rights. So those are things that sometimes don't always show up on someone's record or go through the court system that we would call it informal eviction. Like I said, there's no real data on that information.
These informal evictions go across the board too. Everybody uses, different kinds of forms. And so a landlord could serve somebody with a piece of paper that says you need to be out in 3 days. For whatever reason, you breached the lease, here's how you breached the lease, you need to be out in 3 days. And that person will think that they need to be out in 3 days. They don't need to be out in 3 days. But they think they need to be out in 3 days, and so and then they'll refer to that as, I was evicted. I was evicted. The only way you can, and some landlords will give you 10 days, and some will give you 5 days, and some will give you till the end of the month, and some will give you 30 days. And I mean, it's all over the board with different landlords. They want possession of the property, they give you a piece of paper, they say, be out, and they expect that you're going to be out, and you expect that you need to be out, and so you leave, but you don't need to. The only way you can be evicted in Indiana, in Marion County, because we're talking about Marion County, but in the entire state, is if a court orders that the possession of the property be given back to the landlord. That is the only way you can be evicted. And the only way a landlord can get that court order is if they file an action against you, serve you with the papers, tell you when the hearing is, and then go to court to get the court to enter that order. That's the only way that you can be evicted. Now, the case filing itself is a problem because now, anybody here can Google My Case Indiana, pull up a name, and see how many cases that person has been involved in. A case will often get filed and then get dismissed because the tenant paid money, right? They weren't evicted. An eviction action was filed against them. They weren't evicted, they paid up, and now a future landlord, a future property manager 10 years from now can do a credit check on them and find that a case has been filed against them and not look any further. They'll just see the case. I'm working with a client right now that has 14 eviction cases filed against him in the last 4 years, all for non-payment of rent. Okay? Every single time he paid after the case was filed against him. He's lived there for 7 years. Every single time. 14 cases, though, filed against him. He can't pay this time. He needs to move. He's afraid to move. Why? He can't. He's not going to be able to find a new place to go. Because those cases are there, and the landlord's going to see all those cases.
We have a question here.
So Mike mentioned all of the initiatives, the bills that were on the table that didn't get through. It seems to me such a cyclical problem because life events get in the way, people can't pay, and landlords who I'm sure would much rather have the rent than have to go through these processes or threaten people with potential eviction are stuck instead on their side because they can't make their payments if they're not getting the rent. How do we somehow encourage landlords, developers to understand it's in their interest to support these bills and get them to help push for them? Because it will, in the long run, make their lives easier if we have community systems and legislation in place that are going to help people get past those interim events and keep their rent flowing in the meantime.
So I think there's a few things. One, there's a huger question about why people purchase properties to lease if they can't afford to miss a few months, right? So that's a separate question. The other thing is, I think you raised a good point about kind of almost like a safety net for landlords, and I think the documentary alluded to this too. That's what public housing was intended to do, is to help offset that. But waiting lists are terrible, and as they said in the documentary, federal funding, they're trying to slash that at every possible turn. So the safety net for landlords and people doesn't exist federally anymore. And so some of those options are kind of on the back burner too. I think you raised a complicated question about how do we get them to care. And I don't think there's really a quick and dirty answer for that. I think there have been attempts to try and get them to be held accountable. Indianapolis, for example, has a landlord registry where landlords are supposed to put their information on there. We've tried contacting people on that registry. Emails don't work. Phone numbers do the disconnected noises. So there's not really a way to hold them accountable there. And so if we can't even get them there, how do we get them to kind of collectively come together to lobby for these issues? There are some lobbying groups. Michael might have some more thoughts around this, but like apartment associations. So there are groups that are very powerful lobbying groups that are actively fighting for their own rights as kind of business owners. And so I think that would probably be the entree for getting some of those folks engaged, but switching their minds is a different question. We also have landlord training that takes place locally that's attempting to get landlords to understand kind of their rights as landlords, how to get tenants engaged and be kind of like a good tenant. And those are also opportunities to engage them, I think, locally on some of those topics. There's also some tenants' rights groups where they're trying to show renters how to, stand up for their rights as well, so they can also be kind of like a counterforce. But I think legislatively, it's kind of a different issue. So there's a lot of discriminatory practices, preconceived notions about what it means to be a low-income person and what the incentives are for them to rent to them better. I think Michael made a good point earlier about that safety net and all the holes in it. If that were stronger, I think landlords might be more willing to take a risk on lower-income people because they know that there's a better safety net to help bail them out. If that's not there, why would you take a risk knowing that you're not going to get your rent paid on time? So that's kind of a long-winded answer to a complex question.
I have an update on that.
Yeah.
I have an update on that. Right now, while we're talking, Mike Chaperon, who's the executive director of Family Promises of Indiana, is meeting with the Indiana Realtors Association to talk about a new program that he just got funding for, which provides a tenant mitigation fund, basically. Rent to these tenants who are high risk. And if they default, we're going to pay you. We will give you their rent. Essentially, they're becoming a co-signer. So that's just a pinprick here because that fund, it was funded by the Royce Foundation, I think, and I don't remember how much is in it, but it's certainly not enough to deal with the problem. But the city's interested in doing something like that, putting together a pot of money that would do that. So that's a thing, but the bigger issue is the words we use. Words matter. So I make it a point, and some of my colleagues hate it, and some of you might hate it, I make it a point every time I talk to make sure that I say, I'm not finding villains in my practice on either side. Outlier here, sure, they exist. The problem is in here where everybody's acting in good faith on both sides. Yet, we use words sometimes, and we talk about how Indiana is a landlord-friendly state, and how landlords have, all of these protections and tenants don't have any, and how we need to plug in, we need to put things into place that, I'm going to just use this, I'm being extreme, stick it to the landlords a little bit more. And all that does is push the landlords' backs against the wall. They're not hearing anything else after you're talking about taking money out of my pocket. And so, just how we have those conversations and the words that we use. I said last night in front of a bunch of landlords that they don't want to put people out, because they don't want to put people out. So we have to figure out ways that keep people from being put out. Sarah, I'll just say this too again, talking about the safety net related. Each township in Marion County has a township trustee's office. And every township trustee's office administers a poor relief fund. And one of the things that the trustee's office is supposed to pay for eligible township residents is a month's rent. They can pay a month's rent, right? They can pay a security deposit. They can help with utilities, right? Here's what happens in every single township. The person goes in, maybe you have gone into a township trustee and has been told that you're not eligible for some reason. Here's the most bogus reason of all. If a case has been filed against you for back rent, for rent, you are no longer eligible for trustee assistance, even if you were before. If the case is filed, even if there's been no judgment, the hearing is next week, you need $600. Had the case not been filed, and you went in there to ask for that $600, you would have been eligible and you might have gotten it. But because the case was filed, we're not going to give you assistance. There is no standard that the trustee's office operates under that provides that that's a ground for denying relief. But every single trustee's office does.
Isn't it multiple months if you're more than 1 month behind on your rent, you're not going to pay?
That's another. There is a standard for that.
Yeah.
There is a standard for multiple months. There is a standard for if there's been a judgment. But the Wayne Township trustee, and I'm only singling this one out because it's recent. The Wayne Township trustee recently denied somebody with rental assistance for the reason that a case had been filed against them. And they cited this, not statutory, but they cited the provision in their standards that requires them to do that. And the provision was, if a case has been filed against you for destruction of the rental property, you can be denied assistance. The case has been filed against them for non-payment of rent. That's what the assistance is all about. They used that standard to deny in a case where somebody was just asking for rental assistance in a non-payment case. I called the trustee's office. I pointed out how they made the wrong decision. And they left it intact. They didn't do anything. You know, we talk about whether or not we have to take the trustees to court just to get them to do the right thing. I don't know that they're acting in bad faith either. I think they're acting in good faith.
We're going to take a question.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to add to Michael's point, too, that we actually analyzed court cases in eviction court, and the average amount of time was 3 to 4 months of people not paying rent. So, again, landlords are flexible, but, yeah, after a certain point, that's usually what happens.
Okay, we're going to take a question.
Hi, I would like to say I have 3 points I want to point out. One being that it's a wonderful program. My goodness, you know, we go to school, we learn so many different things, even here at RSVP, but we don't learn. You know, when you're young, you step out and you think you know it all, and you get a place and you make one mistake. My God, you might pay for that one mistake for 15, 20 years, but, you know, almost my whole journey here, I had problems with the eviction, and it caused me to be homeless. You know, it caused me, but I still, you know, kept the faith, and I graduated, but I want to say that, you know, it's amazing that you guys have found me doing something about this, because there's people right here in our school who are homeless. And I've seen so many people at the hotel that went to RSVP, and I'm like, wow, you know, you learn everything else, but you never learn at a young age when you step out of your parents' house how to stop evictions. And what do you do, even with public records? There was things on my public record from like 20 years ago that was paid off, but they still sit there. And so I'm like, okay, they seal criminal backgrounds, they seal people who kill or rob, but they don't seal our public records.
Yeah.
So the system is almost set up to fail.
Okay. Well, you know, things happen like glaciers when it comes to public policy development. I'm an attorney. I work for a legal services organization. We're funded by the federal government. There are absolute restrictions about me making any sort of comment that sounds like I'm advocating for policy change. That's Priyanka's job. Right? She gets to do that. I don't get to do that. But what I can say to you is that if there was a law in the state of Indiana that allowed for the required mediation before a case could be filed, that would have helped 100 of my clients. If there was a law in the state of Indiana that required that after a case had been filed and dismissed, that it should be sealed, that would have helped 100 of my clients. If there were a law in the state of Indiana that required that, I was going to say something else. I should stop. You guys know where I'm going with this. I mean, there are lots of laws, if they existed in Indiana, that would be very helpful to the clients that I represent. That's policy. That's grassroots work that needs to come up from the organizations that are working with folks. But those kinds of changes can be made if it's the policy of the state of Indiana to make those changes.
Okay, we're going to take another question.
Hi. I have one quick question, a follow-up on your information about the young man that had 14 evictions, and he paid them and was dismissed. So how do you get that off of your record?
That was the third thing I was going to say.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's so perfect.
That's my quick question, then I have a follow-up.
You can't. Not in the state of Indiana, not right now.
What?
You can't. You cannot get an eviction expunged from your record in the state of Indiana. What do you say? Say that again?
I was told that the city council building and on the bottom level was criminal.
Well, you could do that for criminal records. There's an expungement. She said she heard that you could, from...
I heard that, I was told that the city county building would seal, the judge would seal the public records. And I also seen a thing on it's a program that Porter Check or something. They said that after 5 years, you should report to public records. And there was a program that can get it off.
Okay, so let me clarify all of that. So you can get an eviction off of your credit report once it's paid, once you've paid what you owe. If a case is filed and dismissed without an eviction, you can get that off your credit report. Okay? During a case, when a case is happening, there is a Supreme Court rule, Rule 9, that allows you to request that certain confidential information be sealed. So I'm going to give you an example. If you're a victim of domestic violence and you get an eviction notice because you're no longer able to pay your rent, and we use Indiana law to get the lease terminated and to get you out of there and to get you someplace safe, right? In that court proceeding, if your current whereabouts become part of the public record, your housing, the fact that you're at Julian Center, whatever it might be, we can use Rule 9 to get that sealed. And maybe we could even get the entire case sealed depending on what confidential information is in there. But if you don't have any of that stuff going on in your case, if it's just a straight up non-payment of rent case.
What if it's paid, but it's still sick?
It's the case doesn't get sealed. Or the case doesn't get sealed, the case doesn't get expunged. I'm talking your credit report, which is different than the case. Okay, but right now, go to my case, right, and I can pull up a client, and I can find every case that client has ever been involved in eviction or not. And there's no mechanism in the state of Indiana right now. There is no law that allows me or you, without an attorney, to request that eviction be expunged or that record be sealed.
Wow.
I've got a student testimonial here. Alicia, do you want to say a few words? I'm going to give you about 5 minutes.
That would be great, though. While Alicia's getting the microphone, I'm just going to say that was going to be my third point. I can't advocate for a law like that. I can only tell you that my client with the 14 evictions, if there was a law that allowed him to get those cases expunged from his record, he wouldn't be afraid of vacating his current place right now because he would, if that law existed, that would be helpful. That would have been helpful to my clients.
That would be helpful to so many people.
And I'll add to, I think Michael made this point earlier, but that a lot of people have things on their credit report that did not actually go through the court system. So there could be something on there that, you were evicted, but you weren't actually evicted. The landlord decided whatever, and that's on your credit. So if you don't know that that is on your record, I've worked with people like that, then you have a credit report full of evictions, to Michael's point, and you don't even know because you didn't go to court that that's on your record too. So at least you might have some awareness to know, like, let me check my credit. A lot of people don't even know that that is the reason why they can't get housing, because they don't even know that that is something that exists on their credit report for people to see. So.
Okay. Alicia, you want to say a few words?
My name's Alicia Bell. So, just a quick, brief overview of myself. I wrote a few things I would like you guys to hear. Going through a period of homelessness, my family sought assistance through the Children's Bureau. The Children's Bureau's case manager met us at the property with a check. To the applicant's shock, and my family's as well, the property management did not accept the funds due to the funds coming from a third party on the presented check. The property management gave us a time frame, which was over the weekend, by that Monday, to bring the first month's rent, or we would forfeit or lose the house, the deposit, and the application fees we posted. We bought a money order, and my family finally moved into the property on my son's 13th birthday. We were so happy, and we loved the home. Everything was beautiful, engaging, and what we were looking for. The second month came in with a blow. My now husband's boss was involved in a bad car accident. He was hospitalized. My husband was in between pay periods, and other money was tied up in settling in the home. We almost had all of our rent, so we notified the property management that the rent would be late by a few days, but we would pay the full balance. We paid the rent and all the fees in full within the week. 3 days later, after they received the full payment, the property management called us before their posted business hours to tell me that they were filing an eviction for non-payment of the rent, and to please come and pick up the money orders that we provided to them. I tried to negotiate more to no avail. I was told if I didn't come and pick up the payment, they would write void on the money orders and I wouldn't be able to cash them. I was shocked and pain went over my body. Me and my husband went into the office and stated that the only way we could keep the house is if we paid lawyer fees of $500 in cash that day, give them back the money orders that I came to pick up, and pay the next month's rent, which was due in 2.5 to 3 weeks. I asked to see proof of them filing the eviction. They could not assist me and called the police to escort me and my husband off the property. Upon going to court for the initial hearing, I noticed through the initial plaintiff document that the eviction was filed after we left their office that day and refused to pay the cash for the attorney's fees that same day. I pled to the property management and the judge. Sorry about that. I lost my place. This gets teared up every time I read and think about this stuff. So upon going to court for the initial hearing, I noticed through the initial plaintiff document that the eviction was filed after we left their office and refused to pay cash for the attorney's fees that same day. Trying to gain empathy to the fact that my family just became from being homeless, I pled to the property management and the judge. I did not qualify as to the specifics that the judge was laying out about the eviction. So he gave me a new court date for another hearing a few weeks later. I went to court a second time, and I remember that day well. I had no babysitter, and at the time my 3-year-old daughter played and disturbed the court. I laid out evidence that the lease speculated no due date for late rents to be accepted and only speculated to pay one fee and late fees by the day. We did, and in full. The judge said he needed time to review the case but ordered us out, and if necessary, send the constable if we were not vacated by the date ordered. A damage hearing was ordered and we moved. However, the judgment never came in the mail. We never received anything. I was thinking that they may post something like a debt to our credit. I wanted to know what was going on with the case, so my husband and I went to the courthouse, and to our shock and relief, the case disappeared. Yes, closed and no further actions required. Once again, we were homeless. At my wit's end, I knew I had to do the unthinkable. I had to give my 3 youngest kids to their biological father, who was more stable than I. It tore my heart out. This is how we live for now, and one day it will get better. But my day-to-day experience is challenging, and I see my kids and I love them when time permits. I do my little girl's hair to make me feel better from missing her. My husband and I,
You're okay. You're okay.
I'm sorry. My husband and I have lived in our car for almost a year. My husband and I have lived in our car for almost a year. We moved from hotel to hotel to find some type of stability, security, and a stove. And the stove we can cook on when we can afford. We can't always afford healthy food and often have nowhere to prepare a nice meal. Our car is on its last leg and the suspension is dangerous. I am now staying in a hotel and working with IvyTech to find housing. I am a current student. I have also started a non-for-profit to help build up the community. The name of my organization is Community Beauty. It is a non-for-profit community development and revitalization organization. If you would like more information about my organization or would like to partner with me, please see me after the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for your courage, Alicia. She has flyers. I asked her to bring flyers for her. She's such an intelligent and an amazing, strong woman. And I asked her, she told me about her program that she started, her nonprofit, and it just blows my mind, the ideas for it. So I asked her to bring flyers, which are on the table over there. But Attorney Hurst and Dr. Merritt, it sounds like she went through a shakedown. That sounded like a shakedown to me. What do you have to say about her experiences?
So the first thing I want to say is that a landlord is not required to take a third-party payment. All right, most of them do, but I've run into some that won't, and they have different reasons for not wanting to take third-party payments. Sometimes they come with conditions, like a trustee's payment, if the trustee ponies up, might require an inspection of the property and certain things to be, in the property. But sometimes it's going to be 45 days from now when the check's available, or there are different reasons. But they're not required to. And in those cases, we've started to argue, the concept is estoppel. We've started to basically say to the judge, this landlord had a duty to mitigate their damages. They were offered a payment. They should be estopped from arguing non-payment of rent. And we've had a few judges. We've had some success with that argument. In Warren Township, the judge, when I made that argument, the judge basically stopped the case, told the landlord that he was going to pass it, sent myself and my client across the hall to the trustee's office to find the money order that the landlord had previously refused, bring it back so that the landlord would have to accept it right there in court to take the payment, or the case was going to be dismissed. So there's, that's true. The shakedown part that really bothered me about your story was the idea that you paid or you offered the payment within that period of time when payment was due and payment could be late. If the lease says that your payment's due on the 1st, late payment, you can make late payments up to the 5th, and after that there's a late payment fee. Anytime after that late payment date, they can file. But if you get that payment in what is anticipated to be a late payment grace period, then they can't file. So it sounds to me like you satisfied that. A lot of landlords will return money orders that come after that date, whether they filed or they didn't file. But if you get that in beforehand, then that's an absolute defense to non-payment of rent. There's a third thing that bothered me about your description, and I lost it again. I do this. What was it? The voided? Yeah, that will void it. That's a hollow threat. I mean, they might do it, but man, they get in trouble for doing that. They can't do that.
The eviction filing after they walked out?
The $500?
Yeah, thank you. That was it. Thank you. Okay, so no, it's this idea of a fee that they're going to add. So a lot of times after they file on the ledger, you'll see the filing cost, which is $104.32. I hate that I know that. $104.32, and maybe attorney fees. There might be an administrative fee or something like that that's on the ledger after they file, and they can claim that as damages, and you would have to pay that if you were going to pay everything off. Some landlords are starting to put into their lease an administrative fee whether they file or not. And I haven't seen any of those need to be challenged yet, but I've noticed them. So on the 15th of the month, there's an administrative fee that will be tacked on to you for $150 for eviction. But there's no requirement in the lease that they actually file the eviction. That's just when they're going to file. So the idea that they charged you, that they filed after you walked out and then charged you, they were requesting the money before they even filed. If there wasn't a basis in the lease for them to do that, and I'm guessing there wasn't, that really bothers me. So there is shakedown in that situation. But I wanted you all to hear about the third-party issue. Landlords aren't required to take third-party payments, but you've got an argument to make when they don't, that they should be stopped from claiming non-payment because they have a duty to mitigate their damages.
That's what I kind of did in court. He
ramifications of the lease. And then from there, it pretty much, we never got that initial judgment in the mail, you know, how the judge ordered the net. We never got anything. So by the time we had moved out of the house and we went back to court to see what was going on, the whole case had disappeared. Even the judgment, the order, everything just was gone.
Yeah, which goes to this project, which goes to New York City, which goes to Philadelphia. Having a lawyer in the process, because these are very emotional proceedings. Very emotional proceedings. A lot of my non-payment of rent clients, they don't pay not on purpose, they don't pay because they can't pay, right? The landlord files against them, and now the client has their back against the wall, and all of a sudden the client is telling me about the black mold and about this and this and this, and identifying, and how the landlord was rude, and how they kicked him out of the office, and how once they called the police on him, and there's all of this stuff, and it becomes very emotional and gets well beyond kind of that one issue that's involved. Having an attorney keeps that from happening on both sides of the situation. So a right to counsel in these cases is very important because it can protect you from the shakedown and the judge who's not quite looking at it, because these are very transactional things too. Lawyers will come in with 40 or 50 files, all of them evictions, and the judge basically has a formula. Are you behind in your rent? Yes, I'm behind in my rent. Okay, order possession, enter a writ. You need to be out 5 days unless you work it out. That's the song that is sung in court. Having an attorney there to tell your story is huge, not only because it helps you with the legal issue, but also because you've got an attorney. You've got somebody there. Would you indulge me for this one quick story? I got to tell you guys this, because it's my wow moment. My wow moment was when I was representing a man who had been homeless for 40 years, 40 years in the city of Indianapolis. And he was put into housing as part of a rapid rehousing program. But because he had been homeless for 40 years and had all of the baggage that comes with being homeless for 40 years, he didn't know how to live in an apartment, right? That makes sense. And so he roamed the halls at 2:30 in the morning, and he banged on doors, and he got drunk all the time, and he brought a cart into the hallway, dripping trash, and right? He didn't know how to live in a multi-unit dwelling. And finally, after a long time, the apartment manager said, I have to put him out, and filed against him. Now, representing him, we got him 2 more months in that apartment until we could get him placed. And when I say we, I mean somebody, not me. Until a homeless service organization could get him placed someplace else. So it was a successful failure. He had to leave, but he left without an eviction on his record, not that he would have cared. But he left without an eviction on his record, and he had a soft landing. But my wow moment was, as I stood there telling his story in front of the judge, he had been drinking. It was 8:30 in the morning. And he was like this next to me. And I told his story to the judge about what he had experienced and where he had been and what happened with rapid rehousing and all of the things he had done in good faith to become a productive member of society, to be, right? And as I was doing this, for all the good that was going to do with the court, right? Not much good. What he did was, this guy did this. Have I told you this? This guy did this. As I'm talking. Right? His shoulders were back. His dignity was back. Everything was back for him in that moment. And as we walked out of court, even though he was told he had to vacate, as we walked out of court, he was like, man, I didn't know I did all that stuff. and that happens. That's my wow moment. I can do whatever I can do, and my colleagues can do whatever we can do to help somebody with the legal issue that they have, and it's helpful. But my wow moment, the really cool thing is that somebody's there to tell your story, and that means something in ways that I can't quantify. That man walked out of court on his tiptoes.
Dr. Mayer, did you have any words? We have to close.
No, I was going to ask, I'm curious what township you were living in when that happened.
We were off of, it was about the cemetery, off of 38th and
Fall Creek, or Fall Creek, I mean,
That's over there. It's out there.
yeah, we went to court, Center Township.
Okay.
It was a court case.
And there was a man on the bench?
Yes, it was.
So that wasn't the regular judge
And there
in
was like-
Center Township, that was a pro tem judge, a lawyer dressed in a black robe who
And
was sitting
it
in.
was like 20, 30 families from the same property management.
Older white man or a younger guy?
Yes,
Okay.
older.
So that's probably the judge that sits in Perry Township, who sits sometimes for Judge Roper in Center Township.
Who will be here Friday. So in closing, plug for coming back on Friday. It's time for us to close. Everyone has to get back to work. But I would ask each of you, Attorney Hurst and Dr. Merritt, to answer this question in your own way, and also talk about your organizations and what you do to fight evictions. The question is, what call to action would you leave people with today?
Well, as an educator, I would say hopefully take this information, especially what Michael has shared, and inform yourselves and inform other people. The court process in particular is very tedious. It requires a lot of knowledge. And so there's not an expectation, especially if you're a person facing eviction, that you will actually show up to court with that level of information. It's also very difficult because landlords and other property owners and other folks know a lot about all of it, right? And so we're coming into this as renters and tenants with not as much information. And so that asymmetry in what you're knowing is crucial. And so just understanding not just, everything, but just knowing where to go to get support and help to learn more. You want me to talk a little about my role and what we do? So I'm director of the Center for Research on Inclusion and Social Policy. We're part of the Indiana University Public Policy Institute, which is both in Bloomington and Indianapolis. And so our work focuses on taking really complicated research that's about the city and the country and the state and boiling it down for people like legislators, like nonprofit leaders to know where the gaps are. So we've been doing work around housing for years, and over the past year, the eviction stuff has really taken off. I have kind of a wow moment too, Michael. Mine's not as personally impactful as his story, but there was a meeting of like the Warren Township trustee, the judge, all these people a couple of weeks ago. We had done a brief around eviction trends in Marion County and showing by township what's going on so that judges and other people in those townships can be informed about what they look like compared to other places. So the Warren Township trustee held up our report in this room with all these people and said, we have increased our eviction rates over the past 5 years. This is terrible, and we need to do something about it now. And so all these people across the table are like, well, we didn't know that either. And so our role in this process is just being that information, which is why I'm saying be informed. But our goal is to make that information accessible to everyone to be able to have the information to make relevant decisions, whether it's a policymaker, a nonprofit person, or just a regular person on the street. So we try to make our information user-friendly and hopefully keep the conversation going to help, Michael's point, not advocate for policy, but let people know what works and what doesn't.
Attorney Hurst?
Well, asking me to reflect on a call to action invites me to do something I'm federally prohibited from doing. There's a camera taping me, so I couldn't even deny it later on. So I would just, I guess the call to action from my perspective is...
From your personal perspective, let's say that.
Yeah, that's a nice try. My call to action is communications call to action, basically. It's, you said, inform yourselves. I was with the city official a couple of days ago, Monday morning, in fact, and we were looking at this Bill of Rights ordinance that they were looking at. And I reflected on this thing that was really important. There's this tenant rights brochure that they're creating, and it's 2 pages, and no one's going to read it, right? It needs to be more graphic. It needs, there are all kinds of, and they'll work with that. But what was amazing was it started out with tenant rights, and there's 3 or 10 or whatever it was, and then after that it talked about tenant obligations, and it listed like 6 or 8 things under tenant obligations. And guess what was missing from those 6 to 8 things? That you have to pay your rent. Okay. Now I'm not saying that there are reasons why you can't pay your rent. Life happens to all of us, right? But it struck me after working with, 256 referrals and working directly with 200 clients over the last year, most of my clients come because of non-payment of rent issues related to life happening to them. It was really, really important. It's really, really important to me to make sure that until Indiana law changes in some significant way, that everybody understands what their obligations as tenants are, because no matter what wrong stuff the landlords are doing, you still have to pay your rent. And if you don't, they have the most solid basis to have you evicted that ever existed in the history of the world. And they're going to get you evicted for that reason. So I think it's really important that people understand what their rights and their obligations are. And it's really important that people research where they can get assistance, silos or not, and then seek to get that assistance before the case is filed. And I think that if you can sing that song high and large to people, if you can spread that word, then people are going to start coming for help before they get into the position where they have lost all their leverage. Even somebody that runs their mouth as much as me is ultimately going to get a judge or a landlord who's going to say, you can talk as much as you want, I'm still going to do what I want to do.
Attorney Hurst, you told me you were shy when I first met you. What do I feel too? I would just want to say thank you so much for coming. Everybody, give them a hand. Thank you so much. Lunch, let's give AARP a hand for providing lunch today. I asked the gentleman from AARP, American Association of Retired Persons, why us? Why are you interested in sponsoring this event? And as you all know, hunger and homelessness affects the elderly as well. So they said that's why we're here. We're here for the same reasons as you are. If you all would take a moment to fill out the surveys, and you can just leave them on your tables, and we'll come around and pick them up. Thank you so much for coming out. We really appreciate it. And we will see you Friday for the big community symposium, hopefully. Thanks again.
There's a great lawyer, Chase Holler, from Neighborhood Christian Legal Services, who's going to be on the panel for that. And Judge Roper will be here, too. That's a great thing. You guys should definitely come to that.